member from us. He's very much a supporter of that. Jim works at the dam, but this is not his job, this is his hobby. And part of the program that he will share with us is put together by Lee Taylor, who was unable to be with us, but Lee is the one who does the tours of the Petroglyphs. Jim, all yours.
Thank you.
Can I get out now?
Yes, yes. Jail is downstairs, not up here. Thank you, Carl. I came to the winter presentation, kind of stumbled across the old courthouse building, and I have to say that I absolutely love what you guys are doing here, preserve these buildings. And I think there was a natural connection right away in what Columbia Hills Park, Washington State Park is trying to do in preserving the physical structures, buildings, the actual remnants of times long ago. So I have a lot of different things I want to touch on here, and I am filling in for Lee Walker's presentation today. He and I have worked together for 3-4 years now. He has been giving the tours at Columbia Hills Park out to Shehawatches for over 17 years now. His wife's health is deteriorating, so unfortunately he's not able to be here today. But I know last year he said that he had done over 300 tours, walks out to Shehawatches. So I'm trying to build on his presentation here, as we usually start out talking about Salilo Falls in the 20s. Any of you garden in the Portland area, Willamette Valley? Anybody here from the Willamette Valley today? Usually on our tour, that's a standard lead-in that we talk about the environmental circumstances here in the gorge that have driven the people over many, many centuries to respond to the environment here. And in this case, the floods that occurred were scouring away the soils and carrying it down to the Willamette Valley. So if I have anybody who's a Willamette gardener, I usually say you're welcome, because all our soil is what makes that Willamette Valley so rich down there with those floods. The other thing we usually touch on is the ticks and the rattlesnakes that as we assemble up, I don't think we have to worry about that here. It sounds like there were some vermin in the past in the building, but that's been taken care of, hopefully. Where we usually meet up is a blend of restoration, preservation of a much more ancient technology. So my background, as Carl said, I'm currently making my living as a biologist at the Dalles Dam. I went through school as a historian of biology, so I like to compare myself to Jared Diamond. Or any of you academic historians have read any of the books of Jared Diamond? He was a UC Davis professor, still is. Wrote a book called Guns, Germs, and Steel. Did I
read that.
Yes, okay. So Jared talks about, and as historians, I talk about ideas. Ideas are broader than stories, less defined than stories. Lee, in his presentation, he tells stories, both personal stories about how he, when he grew up in Lisle and Goldendale, walked the trails, and as a young man paddled around in boats and hiked and climbed mountains, and through his life eventually came back to Lisle here and Goldendale. He tells stories, personal stories, and truthfully, some stories we know have more or less credibility, some of them border on mythology. So as we look back using this much older technology, as I hinted there with Jared Diamond, guns, germs, and steel, that defined in his mind probably some period from the Middle Ages until the late 1900s. we're going into a new era now where I don't know that we could even define what those technologies are. But right now, we're looking at a much more ancient technology when that was defined by stone. So right here at the beginning, there's an interpretive trail with some signage that the parks have put in that help people view stones that have been moved. They were, in one way or another, brought to museums. Some of them resided here in the Dalles at a museum. Some of them were more far-flung, moved along a roadside out in Roosevelt. But they were eventually brought from where they were carved, some of them were cut by the engineers who felt with the flooding of the Dalles Dam that they would be better preserved where people could see them. So some of them in their original location in here, what was called Petroglyph Canyon, where there were many hundreds, if not thousands, in place right over near where Horse Thief Park is now. Some of them were moved, most of them were left there. Some of the easiest and most dramatic ones were moved. With the agreement of the Confederated Tribes back in the mid-90s, eventually it was agreed, the one on the left you see there is a very large one that you just barely see the dam in the background there. So this was at the visitor center at the Dalles Dam for some years, and by agreement with the tribe, it was relocated out to what is called the Tamani Peshwa out there at Columbia Hills Park. And you'll notice that the figure here, the turtle, representing very likely some of the ancient mythology, that story of the creation of the earth, very common in Western Native American people, that the turtle was instrumental in bringing the soil up from down below and making the land for all of us to live on. You can see that the figure has been correctly oriented here by conversation and work with the archaeologists, with the Yakima tribe and others. You see the figures upside down right here. In that way, it kind of reflects how naive we were to both the original, in some cases, the original location and the original orientation. Here it is, righted up here. Not a perfect representation of the creature. Here again, you see how that connection with the physical environment and the creatures was often carved into the stones. This is a figure that's out there. You note the three appendages right here and the lizard right here. So there was a blending of mythologies where an individual taking on some of the characteristics of a human also had some of the characteristics of a lizard, and that animism, I think is commonly called, where there's a belief that spirits could move back and forth between animals and people, and that people shared some of the behaviors of animals, and we could help understand people by understanding the animals. More petroglyphs here. The Speedus owl that was, again, from that drainage that drains into Horse Thief Lake there. Some of these are bordering now on what we would call brands, what I think of as modern mythology. So a brand is it has a whole set of ideas in people's minds that you associate with a brand. It's either something you want or it's something you don't want. And marketers use that kind of urban mythology now. In this case, Speedus as a myth or a brand thousands of years ago came down through the Speedus family out there in the Horse Thief Cowash area. And now I hear people, visitors come out, they flock out to, with the little bit of amenities that they have on the trail out there. There's no shade, there's no water, there often are no bathrooms out there. So people continue to flock to the trail out here as these brands continue to have appeal. This right here is a toucan. hard to see here. See the big bill right there. Obviously a bird that we don't see in this area, but fairly well documented with other carvings that exist around the area, that very likely there was a trade that occurred all the way into Central America, where toucans would be fairly common, and it might have been a very cherished or valued trade item, that these birds might have been brought up here as something unique in this environment. And then, of course, the water monster here, or Nisla. Actually, you see several monsters right here. They all share a similar type, and these types of carvings will be seen all up and down the Columbia, up the Snake River. And these large, round, concentric circle eyes, those big pointed ears, and these tentacles hanging down here. And then, of course, this broad mouth right here with jagged teeth in it. To the Nippersay, that was Nisla. They had the stories of the dangerous waters where the Nisla lived. These were, and could easily be seen as, like I said, both a mythology, a story that was easy to tell. There is quite a pantheon of stories associated with Nisla. Very interesting and powerful to tell children, to warn them about the water hazards out there. So this was on Petroglyph cliff face there, within a few hundred yards of a very large whirlpool that was a dangerous, very dangerous stretch of water. There's another figure here that again coincides with the head of the Long Narrows, very dangerous water stretch. So though it had a mythological story brand associated with it, it had a very real function as a navigational aid. Essentially, it warned anyone, and some of these are quite large. This is about 5 feet tall. That these are petroglyphs, and we don't know specifically and many of these were painted as well, so they were pictographs. And that is an important distinction. I don't want to labor on that too much. Most of what we see as the pictograph, the paint has weathered. Many of what we see are petroglyphs that have been carved, pecked, or scratched into stone. These were actually taken from Miller Island. See some of the common themes here. Looks like a shell. Shell trading was important in the mart out here. Many of you have heard of the Dalles as the mart of the West. As we talk about the current economy here now, how for thousands of years the Dalles has a natural geography. And as she talked about the ships docking here and the desire for people to come here as a port, there's a lot inherently in the environment here, both aesthetically and culturally and historically. There's a lot to draw people here, always has been. So we don't trade shells anymore, or at least not as currency. Rocks here carved with figures. Sometimes they, like I said, have natural figures, characters to them, sometimes not. Those are very likely mythological stories or meanings that have much less of a connection with the environment, and they have meanings that have long since been lost. Bird over here, likely a condor. Doesn't occur here in this area anymore, but in the past very likely did. I believe this is an elk over here, very likely associated with fishing. You can see a fish hanging from its beak right there. These were very likely places where shamans would hold rituals, goings on, to evoke the bounty of the hunt. Another mythological figure right here, not sure what that is. Very likely a pregnant woman right here. Might have been a place where someone went to try to become fertile. This figure, we just discovered as we were running through the preliminary, you have a rubbing of right up here on the wall, right up here. This stone now is out at Columbia Hills in the Tamani Peshwa. Not sure where it originated, and through the last century or so, it eventually migrated by agreement with the tribe back to Tamani Peshwa here. For many years, it was believed that this was some type of a map of a village or of a town, and it's possible that it is, but we recently had some visitors, as often people go through the Goldendale Observatory and the Columbia Hills and make connections there. And this was deciphered by Andy Glenis back in 2015. He looked at the carvings, the petroglyphs on that stone, and looked at the sky that people would have been seeing in this area. And in many other parts of the world, the petroglyphs, pictographs, do have astronomical or astrological bases. Not a lot of that in this area, but people traveled a great deal. So it's very possible that someone traveled through here or settled here for some time and brought this, what would have been very pronounced to people. There are clear skies here most of the year, where you would realize and very often use those skies to help you navigate at night. So we'll be sure to leave a copy of this for possible interpretation. We don't want to go too far into that because I have a bunch more things I want to touch on. Any questions? That's the Tamani Peshwa entryway. Those are the moved ones. Yes?
Is there any way to get air in here?
Open this door.
Sorry.
Yeah. Sure.
Thank you.
They did some. Air conditioning.
Windows would be good.
Air conditioning makes an awful lot of noise.
No, I don't care about that, just some air.
How many of you have been out to see She Who Watches? Great, great. Part of Lee's dream, and I think I share that with him very much, is to enable people who otherwise are not able to, partly because it gets so hot here in the summer.
Thank you.
So the trail out to She Who Watches is very unusable in the winter months because it's wet. The area, and by agreement with the tribe, is not developed, and it's not going to be developed. It's not a smoothed out trail. It's a worn footpath, and it's likely to stay that way. So it limits the amount of time that one can get out there, and it limits people a bit with disabilities. So this is a map of the Long Narrows from Lewis and Clark expedition there, from a more modern. This is our trailhead out there, quickly in the middle. Again, the Tamani Peshwa, where people start. Natural visitors out there, as well as the ticks and rattlesnakes that we have to caution people about. And I did see my share of rattlesnakes out there. It's not just a bluff. There are hazards, although I don't know that we've ever been hidden out there. The eagles here, sometimes visitors. Ravens. I was out last week and we had a group of ravens that came out that were giving us quite a show. At the beginning of the trail are these mortars and Wakemet Mound out there. Some of you may know a very, very ancient site, one of the oldest archaeological sites in North America. That, and on the Oregon side, the archaeological site there dates this to at least 12,000 years back. So we know from archaeological digs out there, as much as has been done, which is very little, that these sites go back more or less continuously for 12,000 years, basically to the period where the Missoula floods would have scoured everything clear, so there just wasn't much before that is left. I'll take you down to the Willamette Valley now. But these were the very likely mortar pestles that combination where paints would have been ground up. Wake map means the people of the pestle. So there were also many pestles, some of which were looted out of the site. With the parks taking over in the 1970s, it was an attempt to try to protect these sites and limit the looting that's going on out there. I think they've been very successful the last 15 years or so at this site, although there are a lot of sites out there that are still on public land or private land that are either unrecognized or unprotected entirely. This is the first site. As you walk out the trail there, you see two figures here. There are wavy lines down here. We're not sure the story associated with this, but these figures this is actually larger than they are on the rock. So it's very likely that these were individual art. This was a place where someone would come to undertake a vision quest and record that by painting if possible. This, in contrast, is a very large figure, probably about 15 feet tall right here, and it's a little color enhanced. Lee and I kind of went back and forth over using modern de-stretching, it's called decollimation stretching, that uses various wavelengths and technology to try to bring out the images more vividly. Very likely, this figure was painted at least 300 years ago, so to give some scale, and it hasn't been touched up or maintained since then. It's still quite visible, though not quite as vivid as this, though originally, very likely, if you were even on the Oregon side, where this is 1.5 miles or so away on the Washington side, a sharp eye would be able to see this. And like I said, as a navigation aid, this indicated the top of the Long Narrows, that really treacherous waterway where boaters had to be very careful. To the native people, it was further than that. It was considered taboo, rightly so, because you'd be almost foolish to paddle a boat through it. It also worked to their advantage because then it meant that everybody had to portage, and when they portaged, they paid a fee or bounty, or there was a price to pay, for sure. There are also figures in here, somewhat obscured by lichen here. This one, much more difficult to understand. This one near the same site, you can see some of the graffiti down here that prior, I think this one says LBJ, so it's probably, for those that remember, what was it, the election of 1964, or didn't he briefly run in 68 and then he decided not to?
No.
Something. And some other graffiti here, but there's a larger bird that's been obscured in here by that. But most of that is stopped now. Every year we walk out there with the tribes and look for vandalism. Every week, actually, as part of the tour, we monitor for that. We really don't see it. Hundreds of figures scattered over the hillsides here. Some of them have weathered better than others. This one right here, most people see some kind of a scary creature there. We overlaid using new technology, Photoshop, and overlaid the profile of a great horned owl, and it fits almost precisely, this being the chest right here, actually, and the feather pattern right there, rather than the face of the bull, but the chest pattern of the great horned owl and the wings, and I pulled it at the side. There are also, you see the red and white predominant colors, and then again, red and white, great arcs right here, more arcs, and then the upturned moon right here, very likely. Again, one of the few astronomical observations here, but I think very likely, often represented as a bird there, flying across the sky. And then, of course, She Who Watches. Very large figure, about 4 feet across. Characteristic, rounded ears right here. Large oval concentric circle eyes, indicating special power or supernatural being. Broad flared nose right here, and the broad upturned mouth with a rectangular opening right here. Lots of different interpretations there. The archaeologists would date this particular figure of She Who Watches to about 300 or 400 years ago, though it's possible that it's much older. Although if you walk out to the rock face there, you'll see that the jumbled collection of rocks right here are perilously perched. It's kind of the drama of approaching out there, as you realize that these rocks are kind of perched right over you. If you got a good earthquake or just the chance of time that they could come tumbling down. Although, at least for the last 200 years, we know it has not moved an inch, because I can stand right on the very spot where Edward Curtis stood in 1912 and take an image. And again, we overlaid with Photoshop right on top, and even the pattern of lichen is more or less unchanged. This was both a pictograph and a petroglyph. Most of the coloring has weathered away, but the stippling here, this was pecked into stone, still very evident, and there are a couple of additional marks here left by very likely gunshots. So we're not sure who did that. There were many native people who held this as a powerful, optimistic symbol. The Salina people believed that this figure could bring happiness to your day and optimistic outlook. To the Flickitats, however, they tell a very different story about She Who Watches, and that if the eyes of She Who Watches fall on you, if you're in a fishing party, your wife will be cheating on you. You happen to be falling under the gaze of She Who Watches. So there were, coincident with the tribal conflicts, perhaps, different stories associated with. Any quick questions? Stone Age technology here, you'll see it's part of the trading routes, that many of them led to a major hub here near the Dalles. Traveled from Central America all the way up here. This figure, recently uncovered at the dam. These are photos that are of an area not open to the public presently. It used to be open to the public as part of the North Fish Ladder there at the Dalles. By chance, I feel like I played some minor part in this. After years, the tribes knew that this figure was here, within about 200 feet of the base of the dam. Thankfully, it was preserved. They knew that this figure was here, and they used to visit to it and maintain it when it was open. Now that it's locked up in secure area, they can't get in there to maintain it or to honor it. I happened to meet with archaeologists on the trail last year, and now that I work at the dam, I was able to kick on some doors and move some things along a desk. It had all been approved by Portland to have the Corps come in and clear this area out. It was all overgrown with blackberry, and you see it growing back in there now. This is just a few months ago. Last fall, the elders came out and they came to this site recently excavated, and they sang and they told stories, and many of them knew this as a traditional fishing site, that they still fish quite close to this, but they can't quite get to this, right, like I said, very near the base. This is a figure of She Who Watches. So what you just saw in the larger, more typically seen figure of She Who Watches, unlike the round ears are on the side here in this figure, and she has a hat on, has the brown concentric eyes, the broad flared nose right here. The mouth is kind of obscured again, but carved out, upturned mouth. And in this case, it has arms coming out the side. But There are numerous figures of shoe watches, some of them dated by carbon dating as far back as 700 years. So we know that the figure was used for at least that amount of time by carbon dating in grave. They're often associated with grave ornaments. So we're uncertain exactly what it means. This is interesting. I just, in putting this together, noticed that this is stippled around the outside as well. You see that pocked pattern around the outside. Perhaps that was painted, embedded with paint at one time. Very possibly older than the figure out on Columbia Hills Park. Any questions? Yes?
You mentioned the shoe watches that was in color. What did they color it with?
They would use those mortar and pestle for red. They would use red ochre clay and mix it with either blood or oil, fish oil, for instance, and it would embed into the rock. So the porous basalt, the oil-based paint essentially would draw. They also went to other extremes to prepare the rock, scouring it clean, soaking it with an acid, and opening those pores up. So even as they weather, the pictographs, sometimes the paint remains. So they may be much older. When the Europeans, Lewis and Clark, came through, didn't even mention it, although I'm sure they would have been, the pictographs, petroglyphs, quite vivid then. They didn't even take note of it because they had no appreciation for how old they really are. Because the technology they used was very effective at preserving itself. And part of the unique mineralogy here, where you can see some of the natural leaching here, there are clear minerals that leach out that form a patina over the top and actually protect them. I also know that there are likely bullet holes here as well. So there was some period of disrespect there. Not sure when those came about. Yes?
How did you know the technology of how they cleaned the surface?
The tribes describe, and they still retain by oral tradition, how these were done. They don't claim, to my knowledge, no one claims that they know who made them or how or when they were made. But they do retain the understanding of how to make them. No one is presently making them, although it is possible that there is some maintenance going on, that some of the tribal members, and they, as Edward Curtis described it when he came through in the early 1900s in his ethnography, he described it as secret societies. They wanted to keep, part of the power of the mythology is that it have all this secrecy associated with it. So both the technology, how the carving in stone is made is important, and so there may be a big gaps in our knowledge that there may actually be people out there yet who know, who still hang on to those as very significant. You had a question? Yeah.
So on your map that showed this being a trade center and it looked like natives were coming from South America, was there any investigation on this particular petroglyph about it being a South American image or?
Not to my knowledge. No, I don't know. I think the broader theme, the way modern archaeologists or anthropologists approach this, is in the cultural context. So as Jim Kaiser, who's done numerous books and studied this area for much of his life, describes this as a death mask, as associated with the pestilence that occurred in this area, that in that same time period, what might have been a minor figure or even a very optimistic figure, this was a symbol of new life, perhaps as an honored chieftain, a woman. For various reasons, we know that it has the symbolism of a woman that wear a plug in the lip. But that as the tribes declined in number with the pestilence, that it became associated as a kind of a desperate attempt to bring the souls, the spirits of the babies back, and to increase the fertility. So That's their interpretation of it. The tribes have different interpretation. These are out on Miller Island, getting a little farther afield here. I'm not going to take too much time on these. Some of these mythological figures here. This is the one that drew my eye. This is about the size of a basketball, painted on the side, on the northeast side, so it's protected from the wind. Some of you may have seen that. It's in a publicly accessible area, so it's up on a cliff face, so it's somewhat protected by its natural geography. That concentric sun, it's called. We don't know if it's associated with the sun. The tribal members I've spoken to, archaeologists, say it's likely a counting system, actually, because they use counting balls. They would tie strings onto a ball of yarn or beads, and this would be perhaps someone's age or a sacred season or number to someone. All right. This figure right here, likely the ribbed bone structure here, the symbol of a shaman, perhaps, of someone who was capable of invoking the inner power of a person. All right, I'm going to skip on here real quick to our video flyover. So the big change here, one quick pause here. Does anybody recognize this vehicle? Claim it. I think that's a Chevrolet symbol there. Okay. This is the object of tremendous desire every spring when the flowers are in bloom. So here I am with Mike Brewington, the pilot there, in the field. Okay. This is kind of a chance, from what I understand it historically. This was a kind of a dump that was downslope from the house, where at the time when you were done with old farm equipment and a vehicle like this, it was fenced off to keep the animals out of it. You didn't want your animals going in there and getting hurt or cut or falling. So there are numerous of these artifacts out here now. And though it's not developed by the park as such, it has gotten out there on the various logs and so forth that you got to come out to the Columbia Hills in the spring, in the bloom. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of amateur and semi-professional photographers who come out here every year, troop down to this site. When you see this was just last year, when the balsam and lupin were in bloom. We're going to fly up here. And as I mentioned, Mike Brewington is the pilot there. He is now a professional. He works using drones to videograph construction sites, large construction sites, among other things. But he loves the area. He loves flying along the river and in the waterways around here. And heard about this car. So, as I mentioned, this trail is not developed, but it's well foot-worn and just off the Dallas Mountain Road there. We're looking down to the east, and we're going to pan up to the north here shortly. Back out a little bit. To the east there, much more foot-worn now Crawford Oaks Trail that goes from down at 14 down there near Horse Steep Butte and hikes up through these beautiful fields right here. Parks has cooperated with ranchers and with WSU Extension to cultivate these native plants up there. You can see some areas, particularly in the distance, where the flowers are not nearly as abundant. They're more heavily grazed. The grazing pattern was developed here by, as I mentioned, WSU, so that they're still grazed by ranchers, cattle and sheep, but in a pattern that doesn't damage the native flowers nearly as much and is keeping the other invasives at bay. So at this point, I'm going to stop here for a brief moment, and we're looking to the north up towards Stacker View. So part of what that transition, Stone Age technology, as I mentioned, now we're looking at that era of guns, germs, and steel, when the labor that people, the homesteaders who came out here, in this case, the lands that we're looking at up to the north there were homesteaded by the Bruin family. There were 3 brothers, although I see other names on other plots. I don't know whether they went by other names in their filings for homestead lands. They accumulated a lot of homesteads that kind of defy the logic of the law at the time. So not really sure, but I do see, as Columbia Hills historians have documented, the 3 brothers who had emigrated here from Germany in the 1870s. By the early 1880s, had gained title to several hundred acres up here in what is now Columbia Hills Park. Basically, the upper slopes that you see up there that were ideal for the range that they needed between sheep down lower in the winter and sheep up higher later in the year. So they could move up and down on that corridor to the very tops of Stacker Butte later in the year when it was still green and lush up there. 8 Mile Creek coming down right there. Not a large creek, but substantial enough that it flowed all year. So it supported the Bruins, who eventually had numerous children and grandchildren. Many of them, when they reached age 21, acquired their homesteads as well. So the Bruins accumulated over 1,000 acres through the homestead process through the early 1900s. And the Bruin cabin, the only remaining original structure that we know of, still there, dates from about the 1880s. It's a small shack that has nothing inside it right now, but had a few tables, or a few chairs and a table that they would use as they tended the sheep up and down. That's been restored to that period with the original materials as much as possible. So one of the oldest structures in Washington State there. Any questions?
Quite a difference in vegetation just on the right and left of the fence.
Yes, and it's the exclusion here of the grazing pattern. You can see it on, I think the other video will show it as well. This area over here is part of that code raised, where they don't graze in the spring, so that the native plants aren't, not the entire area. This is uniquely not grazed, and it's because of all the metal junk in there that they don't want the animals going in there. So this has, if anything, more of the natural character, the natural abundance. You got a question?
Yes, the park over there, when is it open or is it closed?
It is closed in the winter.
If you want to go to see it,
The,
you do.
Well, the Crawford Oak Trail stays open all winter. There are parts of it that are open all year. But the trail out to Cheetah Watches and most of the camping area, the lake opens in usually early April, depending on the weather. And then in the fall, that closes in the middle to end of October.
So you can just go over there and to the park.
Yeah, this kind of abundance usually comes up with the wildflowers here in mid-April to late April, sometimes a little earlier.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the Dalles Mountain Road coming into view here. So we picked up where we left off. The Bruin homestead was up there. Now let's continue here. Dallas Mountain Road, kind of bisecting the view, road up to the natural area, and the Reuter House up here. So the Dallas Mountain Road cutting through right here. The homestead right here of John C. Crawford, or rather the home of John C. Crawford. John Crawford was the son of William Crawford, who was one of the originals. Most of the land right here in this area, William Crawford settled in the 1880s. Yes, any question?
So I also hear old timers call that the Old Reiter Ranch, R-E-I-T-E-R.
No, R-E-U-T-E-R.
Well,
I've heard Reuter.
Dr. Reiter.
I don't
hear the name.
know the family.
R-E-U-T-E-R.
I'm sorry?
It's right. We call them Reiter.
Is that who it was?
Yes. Yes.
And I would imagine, I wouldn't be surprised if there aren't people in the room here that might be related or might know the family. Yeah. All right.
Phil Crawford is here.
As
He
well.
has some things to say about the family.
Fantastic.
My great-grandfather was William Inn. 1877 was when he and John, young boy, came to that original piece of land that they started somewhere down there on the trail, as I understand.
Yeah.
You probably know the details.
So did the Reiter family come after that?
Yes. They acquired it in the 30s.
Thank you.
1935.
Yeah.
They had a loan on the property, and my family couldn't make the payments, so Dr. Reuter ended up with the ranch. And then his son built that house.
I have to tell you that growing up, it was always Reiter. Until I'll call Uncle Doc passed away, and then his wife moved to Lincolnville, took the kids, and changed the name to Reuter.
Oh, so,
So it's not wrong to say Reuter, actually, because that's what John came back as.
so there is reason to that.
Yeah.
It isn't
The
just
good
insane.
doctor took out my dad's appendix.
Is that the basis for the loan?
No, that was John's doing.
Okay. But apparently the structure right here, as I mentioned earlier, the Bruin, one of the old sheep sheds well up here, you can still hike out to see that. One of the original wooden structures up there. This building, is my understanding, there were main living areas right here in this area with the trails and roads eventually going through Dallas Mountain Road here, military roads passing through the area, so there were undoubtedly good reasons to settle here. But also down near what is now 14, John Lucas had homestead, as well as William Crawford and John C. Crawford had homesteads further down as well. So, and I believe John got a homestead in the early 20th century when he became 21, when he got old enough. And those holdings were very much managed together. Yes?
So there's also a family cemetery for the Crawfords. They're at just between the,
Just
right about in
here,
there, yeah. Yes. And our local CPA, Gary Bradford, his grandparents were Crawfords.
Yes, question?
And now that I know about when Dr. Reiter bought that place, my uncle and aunt in apparently the late 30s, early 40s ran that for Dr. Reiter, all over Rondo and his wife, and I've been in that house when I was a child.
As a historian, I'm fascinated by the individual stories, but I also, and I think Washington parks and historians really appreciate the value of this as a museum of the economy of the time, the real challenges that these farmers, the Crawfords, faced, in the 30s as they tried, even with scale, to make this a working, profitable commercial farm. These were subsistence plots originally, and built them over 40 or 50 years to a scale, but the economy's changed, so the struggle in the 1930s where they changed hands. And technology, let's get out on, there we go. So let's continue here. I don't know the detailed history. Some of these buildings very likely are incorporations of older material and older buildings that were modernized through the 40s, 50s, and 60s as it continued to be a working farm. The parking area right there, where the upper part of the trail, you can see the line here of the Crawford Oaks Trail. It comes down through these meadows. 8 Mile Creek right here, looking down towards the Columbia River, the Oregon on the other side. Of course, the view is just obscured by a hill there. We're 400 or 500 feet up here, looking to the east, the west towards Mount Hood and the Dalles out there. The Dalles Mountain Road right there. And I hope, if I haven't taken too much time here, if I can give my mentor here, Harvey, a few minutes to say a little bit about preservation and hopes for the future there.
One question.
Yes?
Can we have a 2 or 3 minute stand up?
Oh, certainly, certainly. Always switch over here.
I'm a member of a little hiking and conservation group that's been doing volunteer work out at the ranch for the last 15 plus years. And one of the things that we're primarily interested in is seeing that the park system completes some of the recommendations of the master plan. And part of that recommendation was to turn the Reuter or Reuter House, however you want to say it, into a retreat center for nature studies and ranching studies. And also the Crawford House, the 1905 Crossing House, and that ranch complex into kind of a museum. Washington State Parks has done quite a good job on making trails and parking areas and some of the hieroglyphs and that sort of thing that they've done, but they really haven't done anything to speak of as far as those other goals were concerned. And my group is small, and most of us are seniors like myself, and we're getting a little tired, and we're looking for some other people that might be interested in forming a little group to advocate for those things. And since we're all from Vancouver and Portland, we thought it would be much more valuable to have people in the local area in Klickitat County and the Dalles kind of maybe work with us to get some sort of a group organized. If any of you would have any interest in that, I would appreciate it. Let me know, and we can go from there and see what happens. Thank you.
And you have a pamphlet also, you pamphlet with a map?
No, I didn't bring it with me. No, our group did make a trail map and some historical points of interest on it. If you're ever over there at the ranch, at the various entry points, we have produced and provided brochures for there. And I think you'll find that little pamphlet interesting. I'm sorry I didn't bring any along to pass out. I didn't think about it. At my age, I don't think about too much.
Thank you, everyone. And there are refreshments downstairs and conversation and membership forms and brochures and a brand new jail exhibit if you haven't been here before. Thank you.